Hey everyone, long time no see. I know, I'm really sorry. We've been away from home for the past couple months. We've been staying here, and I love it here, but the problem with being away from home is at home I can usually find like a quiet minute to film because it's just me and my mom. But down here we've had me, my mom, my aunt, my grandmother, and sometimes my brother. And so, because of that, it's very hard to find a quiet time and moment to film. So, anyway, I'm, I'm, I have filmed down here before, of course, but yeah, for some reason this time it's just been kind of hard. So, anyway, that's why it's so belated and why I haven't been around for a few weeks. And honestly, the last couple of days, it's just been that I haven't been able to, like I keep getting interrupted when I try to film. So yeah, anyway, hopefully this will work. And I'm so sorry, but I have to make this kind of quick because YouTube has been doing that thing where it's like, oh, sorry, I'm not going to let you upload a video that's over 15 minutes. So this is going to be my May wrap-up. It's going to be as quick as I can possibly make it. But the good thing about it being quick is that a couple of the books I'm doing individual reviews on, so you'll get a more in-depth review of that later. So yes, let's get started. And I'm not exactly sure of the order that I read these in because it was, a month and a half ago, and 2.5 months ago at the start. So anyway, I'm just going to talk about them kind of in the order that I remember them. So the first one that I read the last 2/3, I want to say, of Framley Parsonage by Anthony Trollope. And I buddy read this with Katie from Books and Things because we're buddy reading that whole series together. And I loved this book so much. It was the third book in the series that I gave 5 out of 5 stars. The interesting thing about this series, though, is that I have 3 5-star reads in it, Barchester Towers, Dr. Thorne, and Framley Parsonage, but I also have an order of favorites, like they're not all tied for my favorite. My first favorite is Dr. Thorne, and then Barchester Towers, and then Framley Parsonage, but they all have 5 stars because they were all that good. Specific things that I loved about this one is I really loved the love story in it. I thought it was very interesting because it was sort of similar but had some differences to the one in Dr. Thorne, and I want to look up the word to see if I'm using it correctly, to see if I could possibly say the one in Framley Parsonage is almost a foil to the one in Dr. Thorne. That might be completely wrong, in which case, oops, but anyway, I'm going to look that up and see if that's an accurate description. And I also really liked the main summary. It's very interesting, though. I really didn't get into, like, I liked all the main characters, but I really didn't get into the main plot where I was really, really loving it until about halfway through. And it's because what happens is there's this guy called Mark Robarts, who ends up, he's a parson, and he ends up lending a friend a lot of money, and he's never lent this friend money before, but he trusts him because of how nice the guy is. But then it turns out that he finds out from some trusted friends that this guy basically asks for money all over town, and that he is an incredibly nice guy, but he's terrible with money. So, then Mark has to deal with the aftermath of lending this man so much money that he might not be able to get back. So yeah, but anyway, the events that are sort of the consequences of that don't really get going until maybe like halfway through, I want to say, if I remember correctly. So that's when I really started getting into that part of the plot, which is the main part of the plot rather than just the love story. But yeah, I really, really loved it, and I'm excited to do a more specific review on that. Next, I read several Agatha Christie's. I read Sleeping Murder, which is one of her Miss Marples, and the ITV adaptation of this particular Marple is my absolute favorite. So I knew that I was going to like the book, but I was a little worried that I might not like the book as much as the TV adaptation when I went into this. And the good thing is I realized that I love them both equally because they're so different from each other, but they both really work for the story, I guess. Like, they did change a lot of the specifics in the TV adaptation, but it all still worked, I think. So yeah, I really, really loved both. And yes, that was great, and I think that is now my favorite Miss Marple, probably. Maybe. And then the next one that I read was The Pale Horse, which is the second of her standalones that I've read. It wasn't the second one she wrote, but it was just the second one that I read. And this one, it's interesting. It had the opposite effect of Sleeping Murder. I had seen this adaptation before, and this is one of the standalones that was adapted as a Miss Marple film, because there's not as much written Miss Marple material as there is for Poirot. But see, what they do for Poirot is, for Poirot, they did a lot of his short stories for some of the early seasons, and I don't know why they haven't done the same with Miss Marple. They do some of her short stories as adaptations, but instead of taking some of her short stories, they've taken a lot of standalone books and made them into Miss Marple stories. And for some of them, I don't mind so much. Like one of the Tommy and Tuppence books, which is actually one of her smaller detective series rather than a standalone, but I think like the fourth Tommy and Tuppence book, By the Pricking of My Thumbs, was actually turned into a Miss Marple, and I actually really like that episode. But then for Pale Horse, when I read the standalone is so much stronger as a book than it is as this adaptation, because I just think that putting Miss Marple in the TV adaptation just completely downgraded the roles of the two main characters, who in the book serve as the two main detectives, and yeah, that I just thought that her being put in the story completely took away from the two main characters who were in it. However, there was a subplot in the TV adaptation that I liked a lot that I wished had been included in the book. But anyway, so yeah, I really, really liked Pale Horse. And then next I finally finished Partners in Crime, which is the second Tommy and Tuppence book, and it's the one that's a collection of short stories, and I think it's the only one that's like that. All the other four are all novels, and I only had like the last 3 or 4 stories to go, so about 2 hours of the audiobook, and I really, really loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I then rewatched the 80s TV series that I started watching in the middle of reading it, and I love that TV series. I think it is a fantastic series adaptation, and it has Francesca Annis and James Warwick as Tommy and Tuppence, and I thought they were fantastic. And the wardrobe, especially for Francesca Annis, is beautiful, and I want it because, oh my gosh, all her clothes and hats in that show are just so fantastic. And yeah, so I'm going to do a more in-depth review of that one because I want to talk about what individual stories I loved and what individual stories I didn't really love and why a little bit. So those were all the Marples the Agatha Christie's that I read. And then I read Anne of Avonlea, which is the second Anne of Green Gables book, and I loved it more than I was expecting to based on other people's reviews of it. A lot of people say that the rest of the series after Green Gables really goes downhill. But I was then surprised at how much I really loved Anne of Avonlea, so that was great. But I did end up loving Anne of the Island more, but I'll talk about that in my June wrap-up because I read that one in June. But yeah, I really loved Anne of Avonlea. I would definitely give it like a 4.5, I think, depending on what I gave Anne of Green Gables. I think if I gave Anne of Green Gables a 5, I would give Anne of Avonlea a 4.5. But anyway, okay, so next I reread Outlander, which is always good to reread that because I really like it. The only downside is as an adult, I have found that I find Claire's actions more annoying than I did as a teenager, mostly because I find a lot of her decisions incredibly stupid and thoughtless, and she kind of expects to be able to make these decisions and not have repercussions come back on her. And you know, I sort of get why she feels that way, but I still don't think it's justified. I don't, yeah, anyway. So I still like the character of Claire, and I love everything. Like, I love the history, I love all the other characters, except obviously the characters that you're supposed to hate, like Jack Randall, who is the scum of the earth. But, yeah, so I was happy that reading it as an adult, the only thing that changed was how much I disliked Claire. Or how much I disliked Claire's actions, but I still like her as a character, most of the time. And of course there are things that happen later in the book that are very, very unfortunate. Not even unfortunate, just downright disgusting and terrible. And I really, really wish that, that Diana Gabaldon could have written the story without those things. But at this point, I just try to skim through the last third of the book, and I just kind of cry, and yeah, anyway. So yeah, reread Outlander, and next I'll be rereading Dragonfly and Amber at some point, and then also Voyager before Season 3 premieres. And then, what else did I read? Oh, I read Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon, and that's another one that I want to do a separate review of because I loved it, and I loved the movie, and I want to do a book-to-movie comparison. It's the first YA that I've read in a long while, and it's the first one that I've given 5 out of 5 stars to in a long while, so yeah, really, really loved it. And I also read Archie Volume 1 by Mark Waid, and sadly, I did not love this. I gave it 3 stars maybe. I really loved the illustrations, and I loved it how some of the classic characters felt the same, specifically Jughead. But some of the classic characters did not feel the same, like Veronica Lodge. And also, there's a storyline between Betty and Archie that I kind of thought was incredibly dumb, and I really, really didn't like it. So for that one, I might move on to Volume 2, just hoping Volume 1 was a fluke, because I really did love the art and some of the characters in Volume 1, so that's a maybe. And then I think that's all I read. Is that, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, and I read Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, and I think I talked about that in a separate video, but I really enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy it as much as I was hoping to, but I gave it a solid 4 out of 4 stars because there were parts in the middle that lagged, and then there was, the ending fell very flat for me in comparison to the rest of the story, but aside from that, I really did enjoy it, and I think that's everything that I read now, definitely, and I have to quit this video before it decides not to upload. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of any of these books, and I will talk about them all, or talk about a couple of them more in different reviews. So thank you, and I'll talk to you guys later.